Welcome to Ask the Expert on Contingent Workforce Strategies LinkedIn group. I'm Jeff Nugent, and I've got an unbelievable topic today that is so interesting and so important as we've watched the trends in the freelance usage of freelancers and contractors and consultants explode. And the topic of integrating freelancers and consultants into your organization and seeing people as talent is so important. And how to build an engaging organization and engaging with your talent communities, even though traditional HR practices may not have accepted freelancers and independent contractors, et cetera, into their traditional talent strategies. I've got some amazing experts on the show today. I've got Kirstin Hammerberg and Derek Last here today to talk about the topic of integrating freelancers and consultants into your organizations and really helping build an organization that can engage with their talent. So guys, it's amazing to have you on the show today to talk about this topic. And it's a really interesting one because, contractors and consultants and freelancers are people too, and you have to think of them as that. So Kirstin and Derek have many, many years of experience in the industry, especially around marketing and brand building and employment branding. And really, we're going to get into the topic of how to engage with your organization today. But I wanted you guys to introduce yourselves and your company a little bit.
Sure. I'll go first, I guess, Kirstin. So I'm Derek Last. So as Jeff mentioned, my background is kind of a mix of a bunch of different things. So a mixture of brand consulting, more on the commercial side in terms of launching brands and products and experiences in the market. And then moved into innovation design consulting. So thinking about how do you take a brand's position and purpose and mission and use that as a way to innovate, create new products, create new services and experiences, enter new markets, and so on. Also have some experience within traditional management consulting, which got me into more organizational design and capability building. But I've spent my most recent years back in the world of creative agencies and marketing and advertising, but more through the lens of, again, how do you start to take an organization's brand and start to activate it internally to engage with their talent and turn the organization to something that's actually worth engaging with. And so recently, Kirstin and I, about 2 years ago, started our own firm called Tangible. And so we really bring the principles of commercial creativity and innovation to the inside of an organization to make it something that actually engages with talent. And so that's a bit about me.
Awesome. So very similar background as to Derek. We've been working together and partnering together for over a decade at different organizations. So pleasure to meet everyone. And thank you so much, Jeff, for having us on this discussion today. Personal background, same mix in terms of brand building, culture shaping with inside organizations. And my real passion is a focus on experience design and how we can bring that into organizations. Have kind of ran the gamut in terms of working with smaller teams and international teams on business innovation and consulting globally.
Amazing. I've had a number of guests that have talked about user experience and employee experience or candidate experience as they're coming through a process of being hired. And the idea of marketing and employment branding always comes up. And so to have such a deep background in, the creative space and the marketing space and the organizational design and the innovation and the HR backgrounds is just fantastic to bring together and really have a focus on that, because that user experience, the candidate experience, the employee experience really drives not only, the idea of engagement, but there is an ROI to it as well. So, engagement usually equals productivity when you've got or finding better talent for your organization. So you're, once again, getting the most productive people to work in your organization over your competitors. So, I always want to throw out to people that there's an ROI to doing this kind of stuff. And it's come up in the conversation so much. What is the present state, though, of engagement in a lot of organizations? And I look at it from what's going on from just general workforce trends with the shift to remote work, the shift to, less loyalty between employees and the organizations, shift to more consultants and freelancers in the resourcing mix. And it's a generational thing. What me as an old guy in the industry or generally wants maybe something different than the next generation and the generation that's coming into the workforce after that. What's some of the, the general state and some of the trends that are happening?
So there are a number of things that are happening. I think, one thing I would say right off the top is that as it relates to overall engagement between people and organizations, things have been relatively unchanged over the past, 15 to 20 years. If you look at Gallup and their surveys that go out around global engagement, it's been hovering between, 12 to 20% of people are actually engaged at work in their organization. If you thought about that through a commercial lens and you had a business and, 20% of your customers were actually engaged with you, you'd probably freak out and you'd probably think about changing things. But there seems to be a certain level of complacency in and around how do we actually engage with people inside of our organization. The other thing that we're noticing too is that people are, and there's lots of research on this, the intent to leave an organization and go to another one is pretty high. There's some recent research in Canada that showed that 79% of people are looking for another job over the next 12 months. So that rate of turnover not only comes at a financial cost in terms of you have to replace those people, but it also comes at a cultural cost in that you don't have continuity of teams and people working together. And so that's something that is a pretty big issue. And then, there's some recent reading that I did. There's a great article actually on people actually feeling stuck based on the current labor market. So you want to leave, but you can't because there aren't other opportunities out there. And so as a consequence of that, you actually feel stuck. And so there are a couple of options that actually open up to people in that moment. The first is that they can stay and wait until the cycle kind of shifts and it's more of a talent-led market where they have more choice, like we saw during COVID as an example, or you can actually go independent. And this is actually one of those things that I see where the opportunity to be independent, to be freelance, to be contract-based is actually going to become more appealing to people and more of an opportunity. So those are kind of some of the macro things. And then when we look inside of organizations, how engagement happens is very formal and corporate. It's about processing people into the organization. It's not about delivering an experience. And I think that comes back to a very industrial bias of looking at the organization as an employer and people as employees.
That subservient relationship of the past and the traditional, hey, I'm giving you a job, what you shut up and take it kind of scenario.
Totally.
Which it's reversed in today's real realm where the most talented people have tons of choice, even though the economy is a little rough where people are in some cases feeling stuck. Mm-hmm. But in other cases, they're saying, you know what, screw it. I'm talented. I'm leaving. I'm not going to take it anymore.
Yep. It's the exact same thing. If you think about it commercially with customers, good customers have a lot of choice in different industries. And your first impression matters, but also the lasting sort of, that lasting experience that you create for people is what's going to keep them engaged and keep them around and is what's going to earn you preference in the market. And so the same thing can be applied to talent. The better experience that you offer, the more likely you are to engage with highly talented people and keep them and actually be a destination for people as opposed to some place to stay for a little bit and then leave.
Yeah, and I always say, I think what we're talking about is applicable no matter the engagement model. Mm-hmm. like employees can, engagement of humans should be the same to a certain respect. Of course, we can take compliance with laws aside, because legal always jumps in and says, oh, don't treat external workers like humans. You should treat them like external workers. Well, what does that mean? They're human. So, at the end of the day, contractors, consultants, freelancers are human too, as well as your internal employees are human too, even though in some cases organizations treat their internal employees worse and less engagement strategies for their internal employees because of what you said around that subservient kind of traditional model. That, let's take a step back. Everybody's human. And maybe there's some different structural situations that you may want to put in place for your freelancers and for your consultants and your third-party vendor staff so they retain knowledge, etc. But in reality, what you're talking about, the experience, is very similar in terms of working with consultants, employees, or third-party vendors.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that in alignment to that is this concept that we like to talk a lot about, which is this total talent mindset, right? That the whole organization represents talent in different pockets, being, employed and having access to different types of work, et cetera. But it's that whole ecosystem, it's that whole organization. And increasingly what we're seeing is as businesses look to their business strategy and their operating models, there is increased emphasis being placed on agility and scalability. And I think that that has allowed a new conversation to enter, where kind of starting to break down those silos a little bit more, really starting to think about the different parts of the organizational ecosystem working together. And to do that, we need more consistent engagement. And we need to recognize the roles and the responsibilities of the different parts and how they all work together in that system. So there's absolutely that mindset, that you're speaking about, which we so celebrate in this work and really try to champion, which is that, talent perspective, and that talent can live everywhere. And when we start to bring that lens into the organization, we can actually really start to design and build engagement models for the future structure of the ways organizations want to evolve.
Oh, 100%. And the other thing I'd add to that is talent are also customers. And so if you have a good customer, you want the best customer experience, you should treat your talent with that customer experience lens too, so that they're engaged. And if happy employees tend to treat your customers and provide the best experience for your customers as well. So when it comes to that employment branding side of things, thinking it in the same way as creating the best experience for your customers, designing that best experience for your internal workers and workforce is so important. And one of the things that I think you talk about and we've talked about for years is that war for talent, right? And talent comes in many different ways, but how we engage with talent, be it external or your internal employees, often don't take that total talent lens that you were talking about, Kirstin, and they're managed very differently by different departments. And there's either overlap between the departments and how they do things, or just wholly opposite experiences. What's some of the best practices you're seeing around as we move towards the future of work? What are some of these best practices are you seeing organizations doing and designing that experience internally for the total talent pool versus just one or the other? And HR tends to lean and gravitate to FTEs and full-time versus contingent or external labor.
So there are a few things. I think as it relates to engaging with different types of talent, but also bringing that kind of total talent lens to the equation. There are a few things. I think the first is one of the most underappreciated assets inside an organization is the organization's brand, and the ability to actually see it less as a tool that comes at the end of your strategy process to say, okay, how do we now communicate this? It's really a lens to which you design everything. So what you stand for as an organization, your purpose, your mission, your values, however you want to frame it, is the thing that drives distinction for you, and that will ultimately help you stand out in the market for people. And so not enough appreciation is actually given to building a brand that's distinct, but also building a brand that actually activates what your organization stands for. So best in class examples are of organizations that are using that not only to position what they stand for. So, a really good example of that, for Nike as an example, if you go to their careers page, they don't say anything around, join our organization, join us, we're hiring. The statement that they have there is move the world. And that's really like you're joining that as a philosophy, a way of working, a belief system. And if you're interested in that, then that's where you belong. And so if you stand for something like that, it becomes a lot easier to, the way that we think about it is design experiences. So if you have an end-to-end kind of talent journey or experience, and there are different touch points, you can actually think about how do you turn that into a branded experience. So one thing I always bring up is think about onboarding less as a process, more like an unboxing experience, just like you would with a product. Like when you first unbox that product, it's an expression of the brand, and you get to touch it, you get to feel it, you get to engage with it. It's not something that's administrative, it's something that's experiential. And the second way to think about it is just like organizations and businesses build products that people can engage with in the world, and then they use their brand to design those products and shape the experience around it. You can actually do that internally. Like think of your talent as a community that you can engage with and design products for. Even things that are simple like learning and development, people treat that as like a blanket, buy some curriculum, serve it to people. Increasingly what we're seeing is thinking about learning and development as an experience, as a product, as something that can actually be a point of distinction for organizations. So I would say there's that big piece around using your brand as a way to design for distinction. And then the second thing that I would say is, because all talent are people, you're going to face the same challenges with all talent, regardless of where it comes from. Your challenge is going to be around attracting them, engaging them, retaining them, and turning them into ambassadors for your organization, actually recommending you to other people. And so you need to have that total talent view, because if you don't have, you're going to miss opportunities to stand out and build equity in the market. And I think that's where, between HR and marketing, HR is pretty far behind marketing in terms of that level of sophistication around brand building.
Yeah, and I think, just building on that quickly, Jeff, going back to the point that you made, which is there's different organizations essentially running different departments, and there's a lot of division between them. We really encourage people to start focusing on what unites versus what divides. What is it that we're all here to accomplish? And maybe I'm going to be delivering it and activating it in a slightly different way within this portfolio or with this specific team, et cetera. But when we can build, as Derek said, that vision and that consistency, which all stems from corporate strategy, it all stems from, brand vision. So it's not reinventing the wheel, it's taking those things and really pulling it through the business. That's what we always really encourage first, which is how do we create that total talent mindset? And then how do we focus on what unites? And then the distinct ways that it may come to life. But I think that what we focus on so often is, what makes us different. And then we kind of lose the ability to collaborate and come together while still kind of having our different ways of activating and, rolling out different procedures and protocols.
Yeah, before you get into the nitty-gritty of workflow processes and technology implementations, take a breather, take a step back, think about that mission and what unites. I love it. And what makes your company as a whole distinct for your customers to buy your product, and build that into the experience of your candidates so they're wanting to work for you. and then employees as they're working for you, and they're your ambassadors for your products because they are also probably your customers. So yeah, it's amazing when you start to think about it. A lot of organizations and people that are the, bringing talent in and out of the organization tend not to think about marketing. They think about process design and how do I get people in before they think about the experience. And so that's very different. Yes, process is part of the experience, but often they think the experience is the process.
I think
Exactly right.
Yeah, when you go into Starbucks, sure, right?
Yeah.
There is a process to buy your coffee, and you go to the end and they have your name on, but the name on it is different than Tim Hortons or other coffee companies, right? And so that's the experience, and the mission and the environment you're in is very different than the same coffee brewer, or that just doesn't have the same experience. And so, but it's the same workflow process to get your coffee at the end of that, coffee shop versus Starbucks or the next one that is taking off. And so it's very interesting, and that you say, take a step back, let's think of what unites and what makes our company distinct, and then think about the process as part of the experience, not the experience.
Absolutely. And I think, the other piece that is so important in that is not only kind of from a distinct experience standpoint and everything that Derek talked about in terms of standing out, when we actually start to see people working together, and you focus on why we're mutually here. And maybe you're here in a different way than I'm here, but it doesn't mean that one person should be valued more than another. It's just that we're all here to accomplish different things. And so again, I think really building that unity from the beginning, recognizing that we're all part of that system is so critical. And it actually helps to build trust and the bonds and ways of working in cross-functional teams with many people coming from different backgrounds and employment types, so to speak.
Well, and it goes back to the original conversation about, okay, what's in it for the corporation to do this? The ROI of this. Well, think of the future of work. The future of work is, mobility is increased across all sorts of the generations. Everybody's looking at it, from the baby boom saying, hey, I still want to work, but I want to work on my own terms. So I'll exude my wisdom and experience, but I only want to do it part-time, to then, the mid-market or the middle-aged folks that want to work, and they're going to work full-time, but they have specific experiences that you only need for this project and you want to let go. And then you've got the next generations that I think want to be CEO from the get-go. So, how do you keep them engaged? Well, for the most part, let them be CEOs, because, they'll come in for the 2 years, they'll learn, and then that's a stepping stone to the next gig. And then you're going to have to find ways to keep them in your organization and keep them interested in working for you. So with all of that mobility in the future of work and the workforce, how do you build this common ground that unites and creates productivity, which is the ROI for the company at the end of the day? It's exactly what you're talking about. And yes, the workflow processes of how you pay that consultant, to how you engage, how you, the technology use is the details, but creating that unity and that mission to move forward in productivity is what you're talking about in the real experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think it's I think it's that productivity piece, which is good to focus on. What oftentimes doesn't get looked at is how you actually build equity with people. And as a consequence of that, how you actually build long-term preference, so that it actually doesn't cost as much to acquire talent or to engage with talent, because you've built so much equity with them. It's so clear who you are and what you stand for and what you offer. And more importantly, actually, what we find with a lot of organizations that we work with is that once you become really clear on who you are and what you offer, you actually become more innovative in terms of what you design for people. And so not only, take something that I would argue a lot of organizations deliver a commodity experience around this, which is learning and development. Again, like by curriculum, serve it to people. Increasingly, the move is towards how do I turn that into a distinct experience for our people? Because that distinction is required in order for us to actually connect what people learn to the strategy that we're deploying in the market. Our people need to learn specific skills, they need to use them in very particular ways. How we design an experience around that actually generates better outcomes for our people in terms of learning retention, so on and so forth. And so I think it's this move away from how do we operationalize things to how do we turn them into an experience that builds distinction. That is like this big shift that needs to take place. And it needs to take place because, to your point, the workforce is so much different today, I would say, and it's also going to be very different in the future. And we've designed for a workforce that no longer exists. And that's what we continue to design for today. The workforce isn't primarily full-time employees. It's a big soup of different talent coming into the organization in different ways. And the more unified you are in terms of how you design for that, the better you're going to be in the long run, and the more you're going to stand out, you're going to win.
Yeah, it's interesting, and the idea of, find that unity, the common ground, the mission, then you're going to have a talent mix that's going to come from different areas and different types of engaging for periods of time. The whole idea of it doesn't matter if you're a consultant, an employee, a third-party vendor, you're all people. Build an experience to make it the best experience possible and get them up to speed as quickly as possible in unique ways. And then after projects are done, people will go their different ways, but have such a great experience that they'll want to come back and look for the next opportunity to come back to your organization and bring that knowledge that you may not have institutionalized back with them, so that the next time they're on projects, they're so much more productive and helpful in moving projects forward faster, versus taking the first couple of months to just orientate everybody and get everybody working on that same train moving forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's almost like this, growing and nurturing a talent community. And even if someone's not working for you at that period of time, that they're in that community. And at different points, people are going to come and go, but surrounding the organization is, as you said, that invested in talent pool that is willing to come back when it's going to suit their calendars or whatnot. There's no misconception that people will just be standing by and waiting for a phone to ring, but knowing that you're kind of in top preference, knowing that there was a positive experience, knowing that within this community, people talk, and even kind of that referral going a long way as well.
Yeah. One other thing that I would mention to that is that, again, this gets overlooked, is that brand and experience creates cultural continuity. So as we talked about previously, when people leave, it creates this discontinuous culture of people constantly coming in and out. It's hard for teams to really gel and generate chemistry. There's a way to create a foundation for that using the brand that you have and that you activate, and the experience that you create around it. And so, again, this is more longer term thinking of making investments today that are going to pay off in the long run. It removes a lot of the points of friction that we notice today in terms of how organizations interface with talent. And that's another thing, that's just one other thing that I would mention in terms of being so important, is that as you build this out, as you achieve that level of consistency, you create continuity for talent, as it comes in and out of the organization.
Yeah, and I love how you brought up the idea of onboarding, like unboxing. So we've all seen the YouTube videos of people unboxing. I've seen the happiest either employees or consultants coming to their desk, right? How many pictures on LinkedIn do you see of people coming to their desk and there's a sample of the product, a notepad, or something simple like that, or a branded coffee mug that says welcome, right? Doesn't matter how you're being engaged, you're human. And if you get a little welcome like that, you feel special and you're like, I'm going to start the day, I'm going to work hard. And those simple things like that unboxing or that unveiling or that welcome is so important to create that experience that sets things off in the right tone versus spending the day waiting for your computer to show up.
Or knowing where you're supposed to go because it's all hot desks and everyone's moving around and there's no spot for you to go anymore. And again, I think it kind of goes back to this idea or this conception. There's so much research out there where, you know, maybe people from an open talent or freelance don't need a sense of belonging the same way that full-time people do, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you know, lots of different research. It's not kind of here to debate it. I think that going back to what we're saying is the foundation behind being human and feeling recognized when you show up somewhere and feeling valued from the get-go, and then building a team in which from a cultural standpoint, it's not kind of us versus them and inside versus outside, but rather, you know, we're all here to do what we need to do to contribute to the larger good of the organization. We go home and we do our own things, but again, as you said, these little moments and these ways that we can appreciate and build a sense of belonging or place for everyone to belong. And people can choose to lean into that or not. But I think that stance, taking that stance as a brand and as an organization to really kind of show that talent matters for the workforce, that it is for the future of the organization, and that the workforce is recognized as a distinct advantage in the market is really kind of what we're super interested in, because the people that you have and the talent that you're creating and the people that you can connect with and bring in, we just time and again are starting to see that those are the organizations that are outperforming the rest.
100%. One of the key things that I have always said in building a business or helping manage within my own organization was engagement eats strategy for lunch. So you can have the best strategy, etc. But if you've got an engaged team of talented people, you will crush it always. And so, you know, taking a step back and not thinking engagement is how that workflow process is designed and thinking about it as an experience is so important. You know, we got to stop here. And unfortunately, I think I'm passionate about this topic, and I think it's a really important one that people need to learn about and think more about and engage with great consultants that can help you. But, you know, I always end off with a how-to. Like, once again, this sounds great in theory, and, you know, I like getting people passionate and excited about this, but the how-to start. Where do you start? What can you do to start putting your way of thinking differently, or putting some of the building blocks in place to move it forward with saying, my goal is to create a better experience for candidates coming in and our workers. Where do you start?
So where we always start is from that place of distinction that we talked about. And so every time we work with an organization, we're very, very interested to see how they articulate, you know, why they exist, what mission they're on, what their values are. These are oftentimes, you know, quick ways in to understand the choices that they've made about defining who they are. And so you start with that, and you start to think about, well, what does that actually mean for people, for talent? And the way that we oftentimes frame that is the promise that you would make to talent. So if you stand for possibilities in the market, what you promise to talent might be about developing their potential. And so it's a simple sort of exercise that we do of adapting what an organization stands for holistically to something that is meaningful and that matters for people through the lens of a promise. And so when you start there and you become so clear on what you mean for people and what you stand for people, you can start to look at everything that you're doing through that lens and say, is any of this actually aligning up to that standard that I've now set for myself? Are we making the right investments in programs? Are we making any investment in experience that actually brings this to life in people's journeys? And so you can take a critical lens to what you're doing and say, okay, how could we amplify some of the things that we're doing right now? how could we divest of certain things? Where are we gapped, and how can we start to make investments in those places? And so it's always starting from that bigger picture of what do we actually stand for, and what helps us stand out. I think is a great place to start, just in terms of thinking about things. In terms of actually doing stuff and activating things, I think this is where that collaboration that we talked about previously becomes so important. And so what we see in a lot of organizations is, procurement and HR being very divided, but they have a shared interest in talent and how to win with talent. And so it could be something small in terms of, an initiative between procurement and HR around some sort of an engagement program with talent. It could be onboarding as an example. Like, how does someone come into the organization? Let's rethink that. And let's actually redesign it in the image of our organization so that people become engaged from day one. So it could be sort of starting with those individual touch points along the journey, bringing people together who have a shared interest in that, and then reimagining what it could look like in the image of your brand. And that could be a really great starting point to think about how do we actually activate our brand in the experience.
Kirstin?
So
How do you
well
follow up
said
that?
already. No, I mean, I think, echoing everything Derek said, and other really important ways to get started as we talk about building this total talent mindset or perspective is just bringing the different representatives of those talent pools around the table and starting a conversation. We talked a little bit, Jeff, before on this idea of benchmarking. Where are you at right now in terms of, total full-time talent to contract to crowdsourcing and platforms to et cetera, et cetera. When you start to actually map out what are all those talent pools, how are we doing within those, and just sharing and socializing that amongst the community, I think we start to build towards that kind of total talent perspective. And from there, there's so much work that can be done. So again, really that idea of building coordination and starting to build the bridges across those different internal stakeholders, I think becomes very, very critical to establish that perspective.
Who would have known marketing as the mediator between procurement and HR? And who knew? So guys, I can't thank you enough for exuding your experiences and knowledge and thoughts on this. I'm super passionate about engagement in the workforce and how to integrate freelancers into the mix, because they're people too. Just is going to be such a huge ROI for organizations as they figure out their total talent mix, etc. So thanks again for coming on and giving some of your insight to the community.
Thank you for having us. It was great.